Hello and welcome back for another Torah Tuesday. I'm Dr. Carmen Imes. We are continuing our study of Exodus. We're in Exodus chapter 23, verses 9 through 13. I'm going to begin by reading my translation from the Hebrew. Do not oppress a migrant. You yourselves know the life of a migrant, for you were migrants in the land of Egypt. 6 years you shall sow your land and gather its produce, but the 7th you must leave it fallow. You must leave it so the needy of your people may eat, and what remains the beasts of the field may eat. Thus you shall do for your vineyard and your olive tree. 6 days you shall do your work, but on the 7th day you shall stop, so that your bull and your donkey may rest, and the son of your female servant may be refreshed, as well as the migrant. Be on your guard concerning everything that I've said to you. Do not let the name of other gods be invoked. Do not let them be heard via your mouth. Okay, some interpreters view verse 9, the verse about not oppressing a migrant, as belonging with the previous section, the one that we talked about last week, which was laws relating to court cases. I'm inclined to read it with today's section because verse 12 also has a migrant in view, and the intervening commands that we just read are oriented toward care for the vulnerable. Israel's memory as an immigrant people was supposed to shape and form the way they treated other people. Egypt had oppressed the Israelites, and Israel was warned not to repeat that cycle. We saw this in chapter 22, verse 20 as well. So the transition from verse 9 to verse 10 might seem kind of abrupt. All of a sudden we're talking about agriculture, but notice that these agricultural practices that relate to the Sabbath are all about protecting vulnerable people and providing for them. So that's the reason why they go together and appear side by side. The Israelites were to work their fields and lands and vineyards, olive groves, diligently for 6 years. But in the 7th year, they're supposed to leave the field fallow, that is, not cultivate it, but just let it sit, so that the needy people among them and wild animals would have access to food. They were allowed to help themselves to the food that naturally grew from the fields or from the trees or vines. If everyone did this, then there would always be a place where needy people could find food. It's kind of like a community food bank, only it's fresh food and fruit growing rather than just canned goods and dry goods. Now, it is possible that everybody did this at once, but it seems more likely to me that it was kind of on a cycle. The Israelites did not all take possession of the land at the same time. The possession of the promised land was gradual, so that means that the clock would start at a different time for each family. So that would result in staggered Sabbath years for everyone who took this law seriously. So while the migrants are not named directly in verse 11 as recipients of this Sabbath year provision, they do appear in verse 12 among the recipients of Sabbath rest, along with beasts of burden and servants born in your household. That is, the residents of the land who are most likely to be oppressed because they don't have the social power or status to fight for their own rights or protect those. It's really interesting that we have here a reference to the son of a female servant. That phrase, son of an Amma, is rare, but it appears twice in Genesis 21 to refer to Ishmael, son of Hagar. And in that narrative, God hears their cries after they were expelled from Abraham's household. Even Hagar's name rhymes with this idea of being a foreigner or a migrant. Her name is Hagar, and the word ger means foreigner. So Hagar is the foreigner. So she is even named like a migrant. The concept of refreshment for all expands on the original Sabbath command, which emphasized holiness in Exodus chapter 20. I love the way Cornelis Houtman puts this in his commentary. He says, even those who are in no position to object should not be asked to do something on the day of rest. So even the people the lowest on the totem pole, the least social standing, the least wealth, should not be pressed into service on the Sabbath day. And even the wild animals are within the scope of care for Israel. A couple of interesting word plays going on in this passage. The instruction to leave it fallow rhymes with the instruction to leave it in verse 11 by rearranging the same consonants. So we had, you must leave it fallow, you must leave it so the needy of your people may eat. So leave it fallow is tishmatena, and the second word is untashta. So tishmatena untashta, you can hear the kind of verbal rhyme. The words seventh and stop both sound like the word for Sabbath. So that word play conveys the meaning and frequency of rest. It helps to reinforce it. So it says, on the seventh you shall stop, which in Hebrew is hashavi'i tishbot. Hashavi'i tishbot. There's a kind of rhyming sound there too. Mathilde Frey has written about Sabbath rest, and she notes that in verse 12 and Exodus 5 verse 5 are the only two passages where the word ma'aseh, the noun that means work, appears in context of Sabbath observance. Ma'aseh is a negative word for work. It's something people desire to be relieved from. And in God's economy, even toilsome work takes on new significance in light of Sabbath, because there's this day that you have a break from it. So Frey says, quote, the verbal and conceptual links that exist between the Sabbath commandment in Exodus 23:12 and the Exodus narratives in chapters 1 through 5 are stimulating. Israel is regarded as Egypt's stranger. The people are oppressed, and their cries to God become the trigger for the Exodus event. It is then because the liberated Israelite knows the life of an oppressed stranger that he is called to create the opportunity for the stranger and for the slave, as well as for animals, to have a Sabbath rest. I really believe that we're all in danger of forgetting where we've come from and forgetting what we've experienced in the past. So I think it'd be a great exercise for you this week to think of a time, either now or in your past, when you were in great financial strain, when money was tight and you couldn't pay your bills, or you almost couldn't pay your bills. So to think of your economic vulnerability if you've gone through a period of time like that. I grew up in a lower income home. We were lower middle class, but the money was really tight. My dad lost a couple of businesses in a row, and creditors were calling. We were getting our food from the local food pantry. I wore hand-me-down clothes. We were constantly trying to figure out ways to save money because things were so tight. And it's easy to forget now, in a time of my life where I have plenty, that how it felt to be in that position of kind of wondering where the next meal was going to come from, or wondering how the next bill was going to be paid. In a similar way, it's easy to forget our own immigrant stories. Many of us have come from other places. If you're in the United States and you look like me, your family didn't start here. You started somewhere else. And it's easy to think of immigrants as people right now who are trying to cross the border, and forget my people are also immigrants. So I'm a second generation immigrant. My dad immigrated to the United States from Canada. He himself was a second generation immigrant because his parents immigrated to Canada from the Netherlands after World War II. So that's a really recent arrival. My dad arrived in the United States. It would have been 1968. Married my mom in 1975. I was born 2 years later. That's really recent. On the other side of my family, my ancestors came over on ships to Ellis Island. My great-grandmother came at age 6, she would have been in 1905, and registered at Ellis Island. So depending on which side of the family, I'm either a fourth-generation immigrant or a second-generation immigrant. But either way, 125 years ago, my people were not here. So I think it's really important for us to remember our own stories and remember there was a time when my family was new. And how did we want to be treated? On to verse 13. Verse 13, I think, functions as a hinge. Some people try to put it with what follows. rather than with the paragraph that I've just read. Verse 13 is, be on your guard concerning everything I've said to you. That sort of looks backwards, everything that I've already said. But it also says, do not let the name of other gods be invoked. Do not let them be heard via your mouth, which seems to introduce what's coming. That is some festival laws that relate to proper worship of Yahweh. So I think verse 13 is a kind of hinge that looks back and looks forward, introducing the last section of commands in the covenant scroll of Exodus. The most important means of honoring Yahweh's instructions is to refuse to invoke or cause to be remembered, from the verb zakar in the hifil form, and that's relating to the names of other gods. To invoke implies a ritual pronouncement of the divine name as a formal act of calling upon God with an offering. Such ritual activity is strictly prohibited in relation to other gods. Yahweh is the only God they should be calling on, and the prohibition of even dignifying these gods by saying their names may explain why the book of Exodus seems reticent to name any of the gods of Egypt, and even to name the pharaohs who saw themselves as incarnations of the divine. The exclusive worship of Yahweh belongs here logically in these commands because agricultural fertility, which we've just talked about, agricultural practices, that was the main concern of ancient worshipers. And the instructions that follow from this relate to agricultural festivals. So although it may seem random to modern readers, the logic seems clear from an ancient point of view. I love the way the passage we've just looked at focuses on care for the vulnerable. Sabbath is something that can even be made selfish, like, oh, I get to take a rest. But this passage talks about Sabbath being others-oriented, oriented towards making sure that the most vulnerable people in our community are not taken advantage of. People whose voices are not taken seriously should be given the same opportunities to rest as everyone else. I hope this has been good food for thought. Have a great week.